Hey everybody, welcome back to Seller Performance Solutions. Chris McCabe of e-commerce Chris with an old friend, old colleague, and new guest to our podcast, I believe, because most of the years we've had this podcast, you worked at Amazon, Jeff Cohen. Is
Hey,
that
thanks for
correct?
having me. Yeah, glad we can finally make this happen.
I know you were 2022 to 2025 Amazon, and
That sounds
then
right.
now I'm looking at your LinkedIn, of course, and you're at Sky now as the Chief Business Development Officer. So maybe we can start with most people who listen to our podcasts are probably aware of your work with Amazon ads, but maybe if you can just quickly run through that part of your recent years and then into what you're doing now for Sky.
Yeah, I had a fun role at Amazon. I was the principal tech evangelist for Amazon, and I sat in the partner group working with our 3,500 partners globally to help them understand Amazon ad technology, build it into their roadmap, prioritization, and really just understand how do you take a product from alpha, beta, all the way to go to market, and how do partners work as a key driver for product development as well as product adoption. And about 6 months ago or so, I joined Sky to lead business development. Here, I'm responsible for Amazon, but also Walmart. I just got off the phone with Reddit. I meet with
Okay.
Microsoft and Google. So everything from search and social to retail media, all of our partners that all come together into our omni-channel management, our measurement solution.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I liked about your bio is that it seems to your new role throws all these things together, your relationships within the industry or with people at Amazon, but also agency relationships, brand development, brand management, retailer knowledge, media knowledge, everything all in one giant package.
Yeah, it's definitely a culmination. And I saw the market moving to where there's a lot you can do and there's a high level of success you can have just being on Amazon. But
Yeah.
the world's biggest brands and the largest brands that are seeing growth, double digit, triple digit growth numbers, are doing it by having an omni-channel approach, whether that's their own website, whether that's using an omni-channel network like Amazon, Walmart, then your torso and tail type of providers, depending on what type of business you're in, from Home Depot to Chewy to Sam's Club, right? And that's all part of the overall success that's needed in growing a brand. A brand just can't live in a single silo today because you have to meet your customers where they are.
I think most people understand that, but is it just bad execution? Just to back up for a second, you talked about a lot of this in your keynote address at the Prosper Show in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And one of the takeaways I got from it, and we described it on LinkedIn after the show was over, was that brands aren't making the most of omni-channel, but they're also making some strategic errors along the way, which are costing them cash that they can't afford to lose anymore because their competitors may not make the same mistakes. And you can't expect that your competitors are going to fumble things if you fumble them, right?
Yeah.
And it might cost you sales rank, it might cost you brand positioning. But was that kind of where you were going with, let's say, instead of talking for an hour, you talked with a bunch of different brand owners over the course of a week? Would you be saying those same themes over and over? Like, you guys aren't making the most of this because you haven't thought of this kind of pan media approach that most brands require that involves way, way beyond Amazon.
Yeah. When we asked customers, right, we did both analytical as well as just general thoughts about like where their struggles are within their business. It's across privacy, it's across scaling, it's across fragmentation, it's across AI, it's across budget management and governance. And what all of this kind of led back to was this idea that brands want to grow, but they have a risk aversion to maybe some of the challenges that they need to see the growth that they want to see. And as you start to kind of look at the general market and kind of where the market is today, what you're finding is that leaders, brands that are outperforming their category and outperforming their competitors, are on almost 8 retail media networks. They're not just singularly focused in a particular channel. They're spread out. Again, they're meeting those customers where they are. But within that, you have the challenge of measurement and investment and prioritization and all the things that come with scaling a business. And ultimately, what I talked about in that presentation was that there's 3 types of risk, and you have to balance all those different risk types when you're ultimately making that decision of what you do or don't want to do. Because at the end of the day, not making a decision is risk in and of itself.
Right.
So you have inaction risk, which is not doing anything. You have the wrong action, which is choosing a direction but not being correct. And then you have the timing risk, where this is a great example. A friend of mine was walking on the streets of New York yesterday. That maybe it was last week. And he sent me a picture, right? And he sent me a picture and he was laughing because he was looking at this operation in New York that was the exact business that he worked in 2001. It was a company called Cosmo.com. What didn't have the right timing for their business. But today, what is operating in the market today is exactly what that business and what that business model was. And so it's a great example of wrong time and wrong timing, and a business doesn't succeed. And then 20 something years later, that same business model is viable and it's scaling globally. And that's just something as entrepreneurs that we don't always control, but we can see things along the way that help us to make the decisions of whether we make investments or not.
Yeah. My other takeaway from you talking Vegas was inaction is not an option kind of thing.
You can purposely take inaction, right? But there's a risk in taking inaction because there are other people who are taking action. So I'll give a really simple example. Amazon comes out with a new advertising type, prompt ads. You might say, I don't have time to test prompt ads, so I'm going to choose to take an inaction. Somebody else, your competitors, might do prompt ads and they may steal some of your market share from doing it. The one thing that I think is critical when you think of the risk of inaction is that it doesn't mean you can't ever make up the ground, right? Amazon Business is a great example. A lot of people were not overly into Amazon Business when it first came out. Now a large business model within Amazon. And if you had chosen to not put investment into it, you could make up for it today. So it's a matter of whether you want to be a first mover and kind of maybe earn market share by being a first mover, or whether you want to be a lagger and kind of pick up at the end where you maybe don't get as much momentum, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily completely shut out by doing that.
Yeah. We see different types of inaction where people just get stuck in the decision-making process. For what we do, typically it's appeals related, or they've got an incoming warning, a suspension, whatever, account health related, but it's tough to get people unstuck once they get stuck with this idea of, we don't know what to do. We don't have enough information. If it's just information, you can spend time getting more or better information. And maybe some of this bleeds into what you see in the brand owner decision-making process, but we see people who are like information overload. They listen to all these things, all these videos, they read all these LinkedIn posts. Not a lot of it agrees. It's not necessarily echo chamber stuff. Sometimes it's all over the spectrum. And then either way, the outcome is they stay stuck and they don't do anything about it. And with what we do, of course, when they stay stuck and they're suspended, there's no money coming.
Analysis paralysis is real, right? And I think that one of the bad parts of AI is that AI by its nature wants to give you an answer. It doesn't necessarily want to give you the right answer. And so you have to be able to provide it the context as well as the data points. And you have to have a clean foundational data unit underneath it to be able to give or get recommendations from it. one of the challenges with information in the market that's out there is that there is a lot of context that's missing. You don't understand always where somebody was coming from or what challenges they completely had. You and I have talked about this for years. I've never met anybody who is suspended who really didn't do anything wrong. They may know what they did wrong.
It happens. Yeah.
They may not have intended to do anything wrong,
Mhm.
but they may have taken some kind of action that led to this years ago. When you're looking at a decision-making process and you're in this analysis paralysis state, the key, I think, is really breaking it down to what is the actual decision that needs to be made? And then what's the consequence of making a decision and not making a decision? Because again, like the worst part of inaction is when you are just choosing to not take an action, but you don't understand that you've actually made that choice. Right. And so
Yeah.
when you're feeling that paralysis that occurs, and it's natural that it occurs, that's where I think you need to reset yourself is ultimately in what decision am I going to make? And what happens if I don't make this decision and my business stops? That's a serious consequence versus I don't update this image and my CTR doesn't change, right? There's a very large difference in the impact that those types of decisions can have. And I think the challenge in all of the information that's out there is that we don't always lead people through a framework for how to make decisions. And so one of the things I've tried to share with people is that you have to have your own business framework for how to make decisions and then apply it to the different decisions you have to make.
And you're more familiar with the technology. When technology changes around you, some people aren't as up on that as you are. So you probably have to fill in that blank for them because they
Yeah, I
don't
mean, I think it's
understand the technology or they don't know how it'll evolve over time.
yeah. Listen, I don't know that I know I definitely don't know the answers. And there's a risk of action and inaction. I'll give you an example from some of the data that we shared. So Amazon Marketing Cloud 3 years ago was a tool that you could have either chosen to use or not use. And I would say like first movers were using the tool to create an advantage, if you will, in the market because they were able to attack different audiences. They were able to broaden their reach of their brand. Today, Amazon Marketing Cloud is a product that every brand should have as part of their overall repertoire. If you're not using Amazon Marketing Cloud today,
Yeah.
even if you do no upper funnel advertising, there's still opportunities you can find within Amazon Marketing Cloud. And so the risk of inaction today on a tool like that is significantly higher than it was 3 years ago because it's now table stakes for most of the large brands that are out there. And the difference for a large brand is now what they're doing with AMC, not whether they're using AMC. And so one of the complaints or challenges I've heard over and over again over the years is it's so much harder to be a seller today. And it is because it requires a more analytical business acumen than it did before because the selling environment has become more complex. The decisions you need to make are more complex, but the opportunity for success is that much greater if you can make those right decisions.
And the margin for error, I think, is just shrinking and shrinking. You and I might have different takes on this to an extent, but we see people botching appeals all the time. And it's if your ad spend is going up and if FBA storage fees are going to keep inching up, and then there'll be other challenges like the fuel surcharge that came in recently and other things like with how they take Amazon ad money out of your account that's coming in a couple of weeks, right? They're not going to let you put that on your credit cards. You're going to have that taken out of your reserves with all these other pressures and squeezing by Amazon and other factors outside. I don't think a lot of these brands are going to make it unless they make better decisions and make a good decision on the first or second try, not on the sixth or seventh try.
So the number one lesson that I shared at Prosper was that complexity is the opportunity. Like complexity is the moat that you can actually build. Your business's ability to actually operate within a complex environment is the opportunity that exists out there. And brand owners, when we hear, oh, I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop, then you're really just waiting to figure out what's going to happen to your business and you're not owning it. And businesses who are scaling, and we talked about some businesses that are scaling either by choice, by growing their product line, or maybe they're trying to grow by increasing their margins, right? There's different ways to generate growth. They're leaning into the complexity that's out there and they're riding with it because we had complexity of pricing margins several years ago with COVID when
Yep.
shipping prices went up significantly. It's not the first time fuel surcharges have been added to your business model. And when one of these pieces go away, a new one comes in. And so never are you at a level of stasis where it's all just calm in the water, right? There's always something going on. And so again, like if you can actually build your business where complexity becomes the opportunity that you can solve for, it gives you an ability to drive your business further and faster.
Have you had any problems telling people, hey, you need to invest in this or that? And they're like, this is the wrong time to invest. Cash is precious. Markets are unsteady. Have you had a lot of those types of conversations, or are you dealing more with brands who think that, at least on Amazon, let's say, their competition might be going away because they're bigger and stronger than their competitors are? So they are
Well,
willing to invest, and they're maybe even willing to double down because they know their competitors can't pay the same fees and ad costs and so forth.
the one thing that we know, most of Sky's clients are larger brands to the enterprise side.
Yeah.
One thing that we know this for sure is that if you stop advertising, somebody will come take your space. It never becomes just dead inventory, right? There's
Mhm.
always somebody who's willing to come in and take market share away from you. I do think the pendulum has swung a little bit towards larger brands, or we'll say brands that have brand equity, brand value. But there's an opportunity to build brands with brand value that didn't exist a couple of years ago. And so that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not one of the big recognizable brands, you can't build it. And so one of the examples that I gave was a business in the DIY hardware space that was a brand that didn't exist 3, 4 years ago. And they've built onto their brand over and over again. And they're targeting for being over $100 million business this year. But they did it by actually investing in brand equity. They did it
Mhm.
by listening to the customers who were telling them about new product opportunities and new ways to use their product. And they weren't just singularly focused on trying to sell products on a single marketplace, right? And they've expanded into numerous different stores and they've created their own category. Now, one of the most popular like stories that are out there about creating your own category is the story of Poppy soda.
Okay.
That gut health prebiotic drink didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago. It sold to Pepsi for 1.2, $1.3 billion. It literally didn't exist. So you can look at Poppy and say, yeah, I'm not Poppy. But, or you can look at Poppy and say, wow, 4 years ago, Poppy wasn't Poppy. And I think that the brands and the entrepreneurs who are driving businesses that are going to succeed in the future are the ones who see that as the opportunity as
Mhm.
opposed to, I can't do it. It's a mindset.
Yeah. We could talk about this for hours, which would be great. We can always have you back on the podcast, but I just see that a lot of 6 and 7, definitely 6, but also 7-figure brands are going to struggle this year, not just because of the decision making, because of resources plus lukewarm or bad decisions, plus other factors that we haven't seen evolve yet. Maybe in Q3, Q4, we'll see those. Do you agree that this time next year, a bunch of these 7-figure brands will have been absorbed or on the way to being absorbed by some larger competitor, or they just will trail away? Or do you think there'll be a new tier of the exit market created where smaller 7-figure brands are gobbled up in group, not quite like the aggregators a few years ago, but in a different phase two? Where do you see the consolidation and market segmentation playing out over the next maybe 12 to 18 months, if you had to guess?
Yeah. So The data indicates that the number of new sellers is declining, right? In 2024, it was almost 300,000 sellers. In 2025, it was about 165,000, 44% or so year over year decline. But the number of sellers who were doing over 100,000 in sales is actually up 67% over 4 years. So what we talked about at the show was that what's going away is the middle, right? There's less sellers coming in and there are more bigger sellers. So it actually creates unique opportunity. And that opportunity is that you're not competing against as many people as you were before. And now we might see that trend might change. I do think there were economic pressures. I think there were changes to the way things were happening in China. Let's be honest. If we're talking about Amazon specifically, there's probably a lot of those sellers who left to go to like TikTok shops because they're chasing the newest fad that's out there. But when we look at kind of the business in general, the data is indicating that there are less sellers, but there are more larger sellers. So again, if you have the ability to weather the storm, if you can build the right business opportunities and acumen, and you can measure properly, and you can use that complexity as your moat, there's more actually succeeding at that higher level. It's actually a very interesting way to answer that question because there are less sellers and there are probably more sellers who are dropping off. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I'm trying to see if I can find it while we're talking, but the total number of active sellers has decreased. So we know that the number of active sellers has decreased significantly. This is all data that's in Marketplace Pulse, covers this on a very regular basis. So if we know that the number of new sellers coming in is declining, the number of larger sellers is increasing, so more people are getting bigger, but the total number of active sellers is declining, then that tends to lend into, what you're stating. Now, I can't tell you why that's happening. It's probably a combination of a lot of different things, but it also creates a unique opportunity because where else today could you used to have to expand off of Amazon into Amazon UK to grow by 10%. Now you can expand into Walmart and grow by more than 10%, right? Walmart's a lot easier to get into today than it was 5 years ago. Your ability to expand into more specialty retail type shops is much easier today. Now, it's more complex to manage yourself across multiple marketplaces, but your ability to expand across those marketplaces is a lot easier than it was, say, 3 years ago.
Yeah. And of course, UK and EU, there's all the logistical and regulatory hurdles, crazy things going on. I know that's a hot topic in some of the groups I'm in. Europe and UK, you got to focus all your chips there for expansion. But like you said, maybe you just need a rethink of where you're already selling.
Not to go too far down the tangent, but we talked about this a little bit in the presentation, which is this is where you have to think, do you have a hero product? Can you build new products off of that? If you're not launching new products or you're not innovating your product and you're just hoping to gain market share, you probably don't have a very strong business case.
Amazon spent a lot of time kind of getting rid of less responsible, less solid sellers, people who didn't have compliance documentation, people who didn't have good performance metrics, people who didn't respond to policy warnings with anything meaningful. I think wave one was there are certain sellers that we don't need and we don't want. And that was like maybe the bottom 10% or bottom 15%. And that even goes back to the days when I was looking at evaluating account performance all the time, every day. But to me, this is a subsequent wave of, okay, now we're going to separate the men from the boys, the women from the girls in terms of who's ready for next level Amazon. And that tends to be larger brands because they have more resources and they can withstand some of these body blows from fuel surcharges and fee increases and ad costs rising out of sight. That's, I think, what's playing out right now. I'm just curious, what's the next wave like once this era of consolidation ends?
You and I have always had slightly different views because we've come from the market from two different places. I don't believe that Amazon is as calculated as other people like to believe. I mean, you've worked there. It's such a siloed organization. I've never seen anything that says, hey, in my years there, I never saw any doc that ever was like, here's how we can shift all of like that type of conspiracy. I'm not calling you a conspiracy theorist, but
No,
like
I
that
think it's
thought,
evident in the messaging. I think it's just
there are,
evident.
let's
Yeah.
put it this way, there are unintended consequences from the things that happen. And sometimes there is a tendency to overcorrect in one direction or the other. And that pendulum tends to swing back and forth. And so I do think that today the pendulum is swinging towards the larger brands who have larger budgets, have the ability to play in the larger sandbox. But I don't think that necessarily doesn't mean that things won't shift back into a smaller brand's favor, or that smaller brands can't find opportunity within there. It maybe isn't as easy as it was 5 years ago, but I think that opportunity still exists because I still say this. I am an Amazon homer. I was before I went to Amazon. I am after. Sometimes it upsets some of the other retailers that I work with. I don't know their markets as well to be able to say this, but I still believe there is no better place that you can launch a business than what you can do on Amazon. And you want to go struggle? Go sign a 5-year lease in the strip mall down the street from you and go figure out what you have to do to drive traffic into that strip mall store and pay for people in there and pay for your inventory and pay for your shipping and all these other things you have to do to run a business. Or you can run your business and you can choose to use FBA or not use FBA. And so I think that there's more complexity here. I won't argue that there's not more complexity here, but I would also say that when you're looking at building a business and you're looking to grow a business, the opportunity here, like I said, complexity is the opportunity. I also think measurement is the opportunity, right? I have a couple kids in college, one in high school, and I tell them all the time, you have to know data. You have to know how
Oh,
to
yeah.
look at and analyze and use data to your advantage. I also bother the heck out of them about AI and make them use
Oh, for
AI all
sure.
the time.
I'm willing to bet that your kids are going to be prepared for the next modern age of employment. From what I know of you,
Like any parent, anything we say doesn't really land with them. They have to hear it from somebody else. So
that's a good note to end on. I like that. So, people have questions. Let's say they didn't get to talk to you in Vegas, but they heard your talk or listening to this today. They have questions. Best place to reach you.
yeah, best place is LinkedIn, Jeff Cohen, Amazon, Jeff Amazon, all those things should bring me up. Please reach out. Happy to jump on a quick call, have a quick conversation. I make this offer all the time. I'm always shocked at how few people actually follow through. And the ones that do usually are glad they did. So please reach out.
I've never felt like I've had a wasted time conversation with you in 11 years of knowing you.
Thank you.
That's my recommendation right there. Thanks again for coming on, Jeff. I am sure if we were able to figure it out today, we'll find time to do it again in the near future. And thanks everyone for listening in to Solid Performance Solutions. We will catch you next time.